Shanghai eases its months-long lockdown, but more than 2 million people are still confined to their homes. For those who can leave the house, getting tested for COVID-19 is the new normal. The U.S. puts more Chinese companies under scrutiny, this time over sanctions. Europe is set to ban most oil imports from Russia, but what will the move mean for China? Cooperation between U.S. National Guard and Taiwan's military. That's the word from Taiwan's president during a U.S. lawmaker's visit to the island. And a poll shows half of surveyed countries are willing to cut ties with China if it invades Taiwan. Most of them are major trading partners to China, the U.S. included. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Before we start, a quick thank you to today's sponsor, Shenyun Performing Arts. Have you ever wondered what China was like before the Communist Party took over in 1949? This show depicts just that. Shenyun showcases China's rich cultural heritage and what the regime destroyed, which is why the performance is banned in China. Captivating and uplifting, Shenyun brings to life the legendary heroes of old, portraying the spirituality and deep wisdom present in ancient Chinese tradition. Get your tickets today at shenyun.show/ChinaInFocus. Enter the code CNInFocus with no spaces to waive ticket fees. Shanghai's roads, parks, and shops hummed back to life on Wednesday. The financial hub ended its strict anti-COVID lockdown for most of its residents after 2 long and trying months. But more than 2 million people are still stuck at home, and the after effects of the citywide shutdown are taking their toll. Let's take a look.
People cheered in Shanghai's French concession in the early hours of Wednesday after the city finally released most of its 25 million residents from a strict lockdown at midnight. Some people gathered with friends they hadn't seen in person for 2 months, champagne in hand. Others wandered the streets just to be outside.
I feel a bit of social anxiety. I haven't seen people on the street for a long time, outside of people from my community compound. I'm excited but also a bit confused. I'm worried I'm not quite used to seeing so many people.
As daylight came, Shanghai's streets, parks and shops hummed back to life. But for some, the allure of a return to normal quickly faded.
Things like losing jobs and family members because of the pandemic in the past 2 months have been forgotten in this split second. Actually, I feel sad deep inside.
China has gone against the global consensus that COVID-19 cannot be decisively defeated and has imposed a zero-tolerance policy to stamp out any outbreaks. During Shanghai's lockdown, many residents of the country's key financial and economic hub struggled to get food or medical care. Families were separated and hundreds of thousands were forced into centralized quarantine facilities. Despite criticisms that its zero-COVID policy is unsustainable, China is sticking fast to its goal of cutting off every infection chain at any cost. Life in Shanghai is not quite back to pre-COVID normal. Residents now have to test every 72 hours to take public transport and enter public venues. And those who test positive for COVID-19 and their close contacts still face difficult quarantines.
Despite the easing, many in Shanghai are still wondering how far the city still has to go before getting back to normal. According to Bloomberg, lockdowns outside areas labeled mid to high risk of infection have mostly been lifted, meaning over 22 million out of the city's 26 million residents are now free to leave their homes. According to Shanghai authorities, 20 new cases were spotted in the city on Tuesday. Because of China's history of underreporting infection numbers, NTD cannot independently verify that figure. According to Reuters, Shanghai residents are still required to wear masks and socially distance. They're also now required to show a COVID-19 test result from within 72 hours in order to enter public venues. That's down from the earlier 48-hour requirement. Dine-in restaurant service is still banned, while 3/4 of business capacity should be restored. Schools largely remain closed, with exceptions only for certain grade levels. But with Shanghai opening up, the financial hub is facing a different kind of problem, termites. Experts say the insect outbreak is linked to lockdown orders. That's because when the termites started appearing, no one was available to exterminate the problem at its onset. One video captured in Shanghai is attracting a lot of attention online. In it, swarms of termites are seen flying around streetlights, while still more insects crowd the trunks of trees, building windows, and even the ground. Many residents reported termites at their homes and offices, with some joking that the insects had returned to work before they did. Shanghai officials said earlier this week that this season's termites numbers started out the same as in previous years. But because of widespread lockdown orders, they couldn't eliminate the bugs in time. They added that temperature and humidity have now reached peak conditions for termite breeding. Washington is actively exploring adding new Chinese firms to its economic blacklist. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said Tuesday that the U.S. is investigating China's efforts to avoid U.S. sanctions. She explained the companies under blacklist consideration worked up new ways to evade sanctions, like setting up new companies under different names. When the U.S. Commerce Department lists a foreign company on the entity list, it's restricted from getting certain U.S. exports, including high-tech products. Raimondo said Washington is seeking cooperation with its allies, aiming to align their trade restrictions with U.S. export controls. In 2019, the Trump administration added dozens of Chinese companies to the entity list, including telecom giant Huawei. The Biden administration extended that policy, listing a dozen more Chinese companies and military institutes on the roster. In February, the U.S. also added over 30 Chinese entities to its unverified list. U.S. exporters are required to go through more procedures before shipping goods to entities on this list. Across the pond, the European Union has agreed to ban 90% of Russian oil imports by the end of this year. One economy expert says Russia will struggle to find alternative customers for its oil and might need more help from China and India. NTD's Errol Rhodes has more.
On Tuesday, the EU countries agreed to halt 90% of Russia's crude imports into the 27-nation bloc by the end of the year. Russian analysts and traders said the phasing in of the embargo gave Moscow time to find new customers in Asia. But an economy analyst said it's not that easy.
It will be more difficult for Russia to find more customers for the remainder of the oil that Europe plans to cut by now in the end of the year. Certainly those markets are less obvious, and Russia probably will have to offer bigger discounts.
Weaver said Russia has found an easy market for its oil. He named India and China as the main buyers, and they get big discounts on global market prices.
But it will become increasingly more difficult for Russia to find customers for the oil that it will now start to lose from Europe, and probably will have to offer bigger discounts.
Before the war, Europe got 40% of its natural gas and 25% of its oil from Russia. Some EU countries are against the Russian gas ban.
Now, for the moment, that's not financially too painful for Russia because global prices are elevated. They're much higher than last year. So even Russia offering a discount means that it's probably selling its oil for roughly what it sold for last year also.
EU leaders called for better EU-wide contingency planning in case of further gas supply shocks. Moscow on Tuesday cut gas supplies to the Netherlands for rejecting its gas for rubles scheme, having already cut off Poland, Bulgaria and Finland. Earl Rhodes, NTD News.
Russia's main type of oil demands more sophisticated processing techniques than others. China and India both have refineries that are able to process it, but few other Asian countries do. Now, the question is whether China and India have the capacity to pick up extra barrels from Russia, especially since they already boosted their oil imports since Russia invaded Ukraine. Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen says the U.S. is planning cooperation between its National Guard and Taiwan's military. That's while a U.S. lawmaker is visiting the island. Meanwhile, Beijing has made a massive breach of Taiwan's air defense zone for the second time this year. Here's more.
Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen announced that the U.S. National Guard would cooperate with Taiwan's military. That's to counter the growing threat from Communist China over the island.
The U.S. Department of Defense is now proactively planning cooperation between the U.S. National Guard and Taiwan's defense forces.
President Tsai is meeting with U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth in Taipei this week. She noted Duckworth was one of the main sponsors of the Taiwan Partnership Act. It aims to develop a partnership between the National Guard in Taiwan and to strengthen Taiwan's self-defense capabilities. The act has received bipartisan support in Congress but hasn't yet become law.
I will close by saying that there is tremendous support for Taiwan within the legislative branch. Our president has shown his support for Taiwan. You've heard from our military, and as a member of the legislative branch, I will tell you it is a bipartisan agreement that the USA should stand with Taiwan.
As Duckworth's visit kicked off on Monday, dozens of Chinese military planes crossed the island's airspace. Taiwan's Ministry of Defense said they breached Taiwan's air defense identification zone from the southwest. It marked the second largest incursion by the Chinese Communist Party this year, after 39 warplanes entered Taiwan's airspace in January. The latest incursion came as Beijing was angered by a statement President Biden made last week. Biden said the United States would send troops to defend Taiwan if Beijing were to attack.
Biden later walked back his remarks, saying the comments did not signal an end to the U.S.'s strategic ambiguity policy toward the Taiwan issue. He added that there has been no change to the U.S. stance on Taiwan. A new survey shows a strong leaning toward cutting ties with China versus Taiwan. The survey is called the Democracy Perception Index and is the world's largest annual study on democracy. It's co-conducted by the Alliance of Democracies Foundation and German pollster Latana. The survey lasted for over a month and had over 50,000 respondents from more than 50 countries worldwide. When asked about cutting economic ties with China if Beijing was to invade Taiwan, the majority of respondents from 26 countries said yes. Those countries include many of China's top trading partners, like the U.S., Japan, South Korea, and Germany. And they account for over half of China's total trade. That said, over 80% of Chinese respondents agreed with the statement that China is a democratic country. Experts believe this may be related to the respondents' reluctance to speak out against the government. Another poll is also measuring sentiment towards a potential Chinese invasion of Taiwan, this time focused on one of the island's closest neighbors. 9 out of 10 Japanese people surveyed said the country should be prepared for a Chinese attack on Taiwan. And over 40% responded that Japan should revise its constitution for this purpose. The poll was conducted by Japanese media Nikkei Asia's research department. The survey randomly selected respondents among Japanese adults and received nearly 1,000 valid answers, with a response rate of over 40%. Only 4% said there's no need for Japan to prepare for a Taiwan Strait crisis, while 60% said Japan should have the ability to launch counterattacks. That's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for more than a year. Here's what to look out for in our second half. International relations talks are happening in the Indo-Pacific. China's foreign minister is visiting island nations there, while U.S. President Biden meets with New Zealand's leader in Washington, looking to counter Beijing's influence. In America's backyard, the U.S. Navy is weighing a big decision: whether to send a number of warships to allied countries in South America. And a deep dive into a case of cultural extinction. That's what Tibetans say they're facing under Chinese communist rule. The full episode can be watched on our partner platform, Apok TV. Right now, get a 2-month subscription for just $1. To sign up, click the link down below. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Mai, and see you tomorrow. An entire continent under the Chinese regime's sway. Beijing has been pouring billions of dollars into the infrastructure of Africa. But what started out as a seemingly generous move has dark strings attached. Now that influence is rippling out globally. In this special report, we look at China's growing influence in Africa, how it got to this point, and the impact it's having on the rest of the world.
Every once in a while, something comes along, so masterful, it leaves you in awe. So inspiring, it changes your life. So beautiful, you wish it would never end. When that happens, it's something not to be missed. Shen Yun, an all-new production every year.
The performance was enchanting.
I feel better about the world. I feel uplifted.
It touches you. It really does.
The expertise of the dancers was really, really strong.
To know that it was live music was really fantastic.
We didn't want to miss this.
Make sure you see it.
Have to come. Life-changing.